Welcome to the SEC versus Big Ten original podcast. Yes, the original SEC versus Big Ten podcast. This is Ron from Oakland, live here in Oakland, California, once again. And we're here to dive into another part of our deep details of the SEC 2023 prediction. And today we're going to take an extensive period of time of talking about who is going to finish number two. And yeah, a lot of people are going to be a lot more disappointed. And what exactly am I talking about here? Like, are you really thinking that Tennessee is not going to finish second in a division? Exactly. Paper pop here on that one. But yeah, that's what we're talking about. We're not looking at Tennessee as a threat this year. I think they have a bit of a quarterback controversy in play right now because the future is sitting behind the incumbent. So Joe Milton has to prove it. And I have the right to reserve my right to change my mind when I see the games being played. But right now, we're going to dive into number three on the division. And it's going to be a little difficult to talk about this in some ways because people are just not feeling what I'm feeling. And they said, well, Tennessee is finishing fourth. What do you mean? Do you have them losing to? Yes, I have Tennessee losing to Kentucky, and I have Tennessee losing to Florida. I have Tennessee losing to Alabama, and I have Tennessee losing to Georgia. That's four games. So when you go 4-4 in the SEC, you're not going to finish second. You're going to finish maybe third or fourth. And that's what we're diving into today is 3-2 and how much closer is the gap between number one, number two, number three, and so on. And unlike the SEC West, I do not have the bottom of the SEC East winning multiple games. So we have Missouri and Vanderbilt losing 6, 7 SEC games. We have South Carolina going 2-6 in the SEC. And then we jump up to Tennessee at 4-4. So that's a 2-game gap. And so in order for you to be in second and third, you either have to be 4-4 or better. And that's 4-4 with an edge with a win over Tennessee. So we're going to dive into Kentucky right now. And Kentucky is a unique story because the media is pushing this agenda that they're actually been a multiple 10-win program. I've never witnessed Kentucky win 10 regular season programs. We're not here to kick up pride on exhibition games, aka bowl games. If you win a New York Six bowl game in the first 3 years of your program, you go into the playoffs. I'm going to look into those exhibition games more as a real game. But when you're going into meaningless bowl games like the Cheez-It Bowl or Chick-fil-A Bowl or anything that's not a power bowl game, that you're not playing against a championship caliber program or conference championship caliber program, we're not putting a lot of input on to who you get matched up in bowl season. We're approaching the playoff expansions here in 2024. So how you perform in the regular season is the ultimate test on how you perform or who you'll be performing against in the playoffs. So this year, Kentucky has a cross rival with ACC opponent in Louisville every weekend. And so that's their fixed opponent. But Kentucky's not playing a good opening non-conference play. In week 1, 2, and 3, they're playing against Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, and Akron. We're not going to spend any time on those three schools. The fact that those are your three first games, you better be blazing by week 4. And week 4 is you're going against on a revenge tour on the road against Vanderbilt because Vanderbilt beat you in your house last year. Of course, Will Levis had a little injury issues and there were some depth issues last year, but we're looking to see by now where is Kentucky's offensive line. We hear so much about their wide receivers. We're hearing so much about their skilled players. They're saying this might be the most skilled team that Mark Stoops has had, but we go back to 2020 when there was issues on the staff, a huge loss in life for Mark Stoops, offensive line coach, who died of cancer at a young age. And he was a powerful recruiter, powerful developer. And I haven't seen the same Kentucky offensive lines that they have a reputation for since he passed away in 2020. It's slowly declined. They did have a five-star recruit that class of 2022 that ended up transferring during the offseason last year, transferred to Florida, started dealing with more cancer issues with his mother, and he had to go back home. So it looks like he's going to be playing for Louisville possibly this year, next year. He may have to get a waiver to play this year, but that was a big loss for both Kentucky and Florida. But has Kentucky replaced that? We don't know yet. We're going to see a brand new offensive line. They've had a solid defense. Mark Stoops is an excellent defensive coordinator in his spirit. He's created a lot of championship caliber defenses going back to Miami. He is the man that found Ed Reed, the two-star Ed Reed. So he's got a great eye for evaluation. He comes from the state of Ohio as his brothers, Bob Stoops and Mike Stoops, and they come from a background where everything is earned, nothing is given. And he has that worker, bring your pail to lunch, bring your lunch pail to work kind of mentality with the hard hat. And that's the kind of program he's built. Since 2013, his first year at Kentucky, this has been his first job as a head coach. He has steadily built this program into a consistent winning program. And so we dive into the schedule, and I only have them with 2 toss-up games, and I'm giving them the edge splitting these toss-up games. And that's why they're finishing third here in the division. They open up SEC play in week 4, September 23rd, same weekend Clemson and Florida State is playing. So this is an early game possibly at Vanderbilt. They don't have too many night games. If it's possible, a night game would be wonderful. Maybe a very competitive game because Vanderbilt's no longer that walkover program. They're a tough team. Every year you play them, every game you play them, you're going to get their best. It may be good enough to beat you. It may be good enough to wake you up, and it may be good enough to just play a game. But nonetheless, Vanderbilt opening game 1, that is a really close game. I think it's going to be very intense. But I have Vanderbilt losing this game. And it's okay to lose this game for Vanderbilt. And it's definitely necessary for Kentucky to win this game. Mark Stoops has in his contract every year that he wins 7 or more regular season games, he receives not only a raise, but a year in extension. So this has to be one of the best jobs in the SEC because his contract is ridiculous. He is on a level of security that basically he's the longest tenured coach in the SEC East, and he's the second longest tenured coach behind Nick Saban, the entire SEC. I remember those games against Will Muschamp, closely coming to the edge of losing to those teams. Beat Dan Mullen twice, beat Billy Napier once last year. Very confusing game for Anthony Richardson as a young quarterback. Kentucky threw a lot at him, a lot of zone concepts that really confused the young quarterback. He wasn't ready for Kentucky week 2. He might have been better prepared maybe week 7 or 8 after he's got the offense down. I don't think Anthony Richardson really had the offense down until the second half of the season. That's what you expect out of year 1 transition for a coach. And so you enter September 30th hosting your first SEC game. And this is a toss-up because we expect Florida to suck because of last year. We're going to dive into that a little bit more and later on why Florida should win this game. But we're just going on talent alone. Florida's the more talented program. We're going on coaching. Possibly evenly matched coaching that you're going to see. Mark Stoops definitely got the upper hand last year defensively. It was a still close game. It was a game that Florida controlled for a little while, except for at the quarterback position, which caused a lot of chaos. A pick 6, a couple interceptions that really didn't make any sense. And it was just a flustered quarterback who was totally confused week 2, playing already SEC game without really a warm-up. So I give Florida the slight edge in this game. And we're going right into the next game, which is at Georgia. Lost, but we're not even talking about it. They haven't scored 20 against Georgia, I don't think. They play them much tougher than you think. It should be a tough game, but can they challenge the game? That's what you want to see. How close or further apart are you from this game? That's what we want to talk about or see when we see Kentucky play. We want to talk about how close are they? How far apart are they? Quote Dan Mullen, he used to say, we're only 6 points away from beating Georgia. That's how far the separation is, 6 points. Okay, recruiting, game-wise, how far are you apart? So you go from winning your first SEC game, you lose 2 in a row. You might be unranked after this, and you might be ranked at the bottom 20, but you're still 4-2. And the next stretch, it gets better because now you're picking up momentum. You lose the road game, you lost the home game, but you come home. Come home against Missouri, great game. Missouri, you beat Missouri. Then you have the bye following week. And you have that bye because that weekend, Georgia, Florida, I believe Tennessee also has a bye that week because the following, if Kentucky is hosting Tennessee after a bye, I give Kentucky that slight edge. You go on the road after that. You go on the road to Mississippi State. Kentucky has played really good against Mississippi State for years under Mark Stoops. I don't expect that game to be any different for Kentucky. They should pick that game up. And afterwards, they have a very difficult. They enter with that road game against Mississippi in November. They pick that win up. Now you're looking at 3 straight conference wins after 2 straight losses. You're 4-2 in the division, and so it's looking good for you. Now, but this next game, you have Kentucky at home. This is going to be a difficult game for Alabama. This might be one of the most difficult games for Alabama because Kentucky at home is such a defensive force. And they play you tough. They're going to play you tough. And if Alabama has any hiccups in the running game or stopping the run, there's going to be issues in this game. We're going to give Alabama the edge in this game, but Kentucky can really push this game beyond Alabama's comfortability and comfort, I should say. And so now you drop to 4-3. You have one last game, and you close the season out on the road at South Carolina, at Louisville. If you're healthy, you should win these games. If you're healthy, if your depth is established and is still playing, we haven't lost a whole bunch of players. If Devin Leary is playing good, you should win these games. And matter of fact, I just want to speak on a record. This guy, Ron from Oakland, has no respect for the Atlantic Coastal Conference as a conference, as their athletes, as their coaching, anything. If you want to see trash quarterback play, watch an ACC quarterback try to enter to the SEC. What was the guy if you could remember the Wake Forest quarterback that transferred over into Georgia? He was a preseason Heisman quarterback, and he couldn't even finish training camp and just opted out of the season and said, I'm going to the NFL draft. Don't even think he was drafted. I think he found out that he wasn't really fit to play in the SEC. He was getting his ass dragged along, so he just quit. He quit football, and that's what people do when they find out they're above their head. They just walk away, and that's what I expect to see from most ACC quarterbacks when they enter into the SEC. Is they're not used to that intensity of the game. They're waking up like, whoa, this is so much different. I thought, are we in the NFL? That's the kind of mentality you have when you're not used to playing against the big boys. So, Kentucky is one of those programs who is always going to be difficult to play, always going to be tough. They can win any game they're in, but how healthy are they? They're one of those teams, they have talent, but do they have depth? They don't have depth of top-tier high school talent. They have depth of top-tier transfer talent. Transfer is a hit and bust. You got to get those boys acclimated to the seasoning of the SEC. And Mark Stoops has taken a lot of players from other SEC programs in the past, and we're going to see how it goes down. But at this moment, You're closing the season on the road against South Carolina, on the road against Louisville, and that's a challenge. That is definitely a challenge. And Georgia enters 2023 with a new team that has yet to win a national SEC championship. When you look at 2021 and 2022, that was a strong nuclear core of players. A lot of those players were there or witnessing when they lost to Florida in 2020. And so there was a lot of motivation factor. There's a hunger factor. They're hunting. And in spite of what we seen last year as Georgia dominating the SEC and going undefeated and winning their third national championship and their second in a row, in spite of those results, 2023 East in the SEC is wide ass open. Georgia is hunting and being hunted. Every game is going to be a fight. You got a brand new quarterback. You have one or two experienced offensive line coming back that really started those games last year. Your center is an awesome guy. He's Cedric Van Pran. He's very good player. Then you have some wide receivers that hasn't proven themselves in the system. You know, there's a you look at talent, you see what a wide receiver does in one system. You wonder why they're not taking that next step when they go to another program. It's because what is your program doing that this program isn't? When you have an NFL pro concept offense and you bring in a wide receiver who thrived in the spread concept offense, that wide receiver is not going to get all the checks and everything. There's a mental lapse. So you got a wide receiver from Missouri, you got a wide receiver from Mississippi State, and those guys have yet to prove themselves in Georgia's offense. There's a lot of injuries going on. There's two running backs. Milton from California has been there. He hasn't been healthy yet since he's been a Bulldog, and he's out right now. They just lost Bijan Robinson, big time running back recruit. He's out. So they're limited at running backs. That means you're not going to be able to ground and pound if everybody's loading the boxes. And if your wide receivers are not understanding the concept meshes, there's going to be issues. And the schedule doesn't look strong right now because we're in the preseason. And when these games get started and played, SEC competition is just SEC competition. It's going to be harder for Georgia to win the SEC than it will be for him to win the national championship. There are more teams on their roster that's going to challenge him than there is in the ACC and the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and the Big 12 all combined. You can look at it and say this, but SEC East has been a better division overall than the SEC West going back for the last 4 years. So you have a back-to-back national championship. Alabama hasn't won a national championship since 2020. There's been three national, we're going on 3 years since Alabama. And Georgia's like the top dog. There's Tennessee, there's Florida, there's Kentucky, South Carolina. Those teams can beat almost any team in the West right now. So we want to look at the schedule in light of that. There's some damn good coaches, there's some damn good players, and this is a brand new program on the front seven of the defense and the offensive line and tight ends. You have Brock Bowers returning. He is the cog of the offense. So if he's the cog of the offense, there has to be more put into. And in my life of watching football, I have to wait and see before I see an attempt to believe that Mike Bobo is actually going to improve this system. Mike Bobo, I don't believe in him. I believe he's married to Vince Dooley's daughter, and he's just Georgia royalty. He's getting jobs without earning it. So I don't know. He could have sat behind Tom Brady. I don't think he would improve any quarterback's life. That's what I'm looking at Georgia. So everything's more wide open than you think. Kentucky is looking at a 9-3 season, possibly 10-2 or possibly 8-4. As much as I said that Tennessee is going 4-4 and losing to Florida and Kentucky, all those teams are kind of toss-up. It's about who's more established and who's at home. Tennessee losing a couple road games is not really that bad compared to all their big games they won last year were at home. They did not win any big-time road games except against LSU, who hadn't found themselves yet. So that's what we're diving into. And now we're hitting to a very extensive conversation on why I'm looking foolish to many of you and saying, what the The hell are you saying? You're saying Kentucky's finished second, Tennessee is finishing fourth, South Carolina's finishing fifth. You have Missouri finishing seventh. How the hell is this happening? And Missouri, who was predicted to win five, they're at 5.5 wins on Vegas. Well, I don't play that game. If you're at Vegas, Vegas plays by who's betting what. They're just trying to get money betted. And the reality is, when you look at it, the reason why the line isn't really moving much because there's no money in betting on the over for Florida. You're only going to make money if you're stupid enough to bet on them to go under 5 wins or under 5.5 wins, which is 5 or 4 wins. You think that's the only way you can make money off of Florida this year. And so people think they're going to go into Utah and lose. Uh, that's really, I don't see it. I don't see. Last year, Florida struggled to play against a lot of talented teams. They were not a good team. And according to the college team composite team talent, Utah was the 9th most talented team on Florida's roster last year. That says a lot. You played possibly the worst defense in Florida history last year. And it had nothing to do with Patrick Toney. In fact, we're going to praise Patrick Toney a little bit right now. He's now coaching defensive backs at the Arizona Cardinals in the NFL. 33, 34, young defensive coordinator, worked under the Roberts tree, the defensive coordinator that was working under Baylor, that was hired from Louisiana. Billy Napier has spread his talent on the defense all over. And so we bring in Austin Armstrong, who's more SEC East talented defensive coordinator. He has the personalities to drive these young players more so than a West Coast guy. There's going to be a lot of change. And I had Florida possibly finishing third at best prior to this past weekend, and I had to change it. And the reason why is because there's a lot of chaos going right now in the media. And some of the chaos that we're talking about is Utah. Utah is possibly not playing their starting quarterback and possibly also not playing their star tight end, Kincaid, who Kuthi, I might be confusing one of the other ones in the NFL. One's about to go into the NFL. But that's big time. He was basically the one working against those safeties and linebackers and splitting the defense across the field all over last year. He had almost 200 yards of catching. So that's a big loss if he's not able to play. So that changed the dynamic because everyone assumes that Utah is going to beat Florida, who opened up in Vegas as a 10.5 point top dog over Florida, and now it's dropped down to 4.5 points. So that says there's a lot of confidence, a lot of betting swaying the other way. So that's one win. You go into Utah and you win that game. It's a whole different momentum because unlike last year, you're not opening up at home in Utah with Kentucky the following week and then a little game and then a big time game and then a little game, then a big time game. It was no break last year. As much as everyone's saying that the schedule is very difficult this year or next year is a murder's row, it's a tough schedule. I don't see it. You're looking at rankings. I'm looking at how the schedules develop because once you go in, you're going on a Thursday next week, Thursday. Not on a Saturday, Thursday. Flying in early, got a head participation. You're going to this game to make a statement. Billy Napier has done this for years now. In 2020, he went into Iowa State, same team that beat Oklahoma with Louisiana and trashed them, stomped them, beat down Oregon or beat down another team. It's what he does. He gets prepared. So we have to realize that Auburn wanted Billy Napier, Tennessee wanted Billy Napier, South Carolina wanted Billy Napier. He turned all those schools down because they didn't have the prerequisite, the foundation to build a sustaining, winning program. And that's what he was looking for. He waited for the position to open. He could have had, if he was at LSU, I'd be worried about LSU all the time. If he was at Georgia, I'd be more worried about Georgia than I am right now. So, young guy has a promising future. But when you open up the season on the road which you haven't done in a long time, there's just a certain type of mentality you train for all through the off season. And you go through this when you come back home and you open up against McNeese State, who LSU beat like 50-0 last year. They're not a team that you should even play with. They're food. You got Charlotte week 4, food. So now the season comes with play Utah, a game that you get your depth established. Let the younger players get involved in McNeese State. Honestly, I have Utah losing 44-10 to Florida, but I have them finishing in the top 4 in the Pac-12. They're a possible 8-4 team. I'm looking at Oregon to win the Pac-12 this year. I think the defense of Oregon, Bo Nix in year 2 in the system, I just expect the better defense coordinator, better recruiter to dominate those G5 programs in the Pac-12, formerly the Pac-12. Whoever's still up the Pac-12 after next year is somebody else. So you're going into McNeese State preparing for Tennessee, preparing for Kentucky, getting your depth chart experience, because there's a lot of freshmen that played last year. There's going to be a lot of freshmen playing this year in the secondary, wide receivers, defensive line, offensive line, linebackers, tight ends, redshirt freshmen, everything. And what you have to look at a coach is, remember last year, over 1,000 snaps per player in some aspect. And there were 88 penalties Florida suffered last year. 88 penalties, and only one was committed by a player recruited by Napier or a transfer brought in by Napier. 14 turnovers last year. Only one turnover was created by a player Napier brought in and recruited. Defense was trash last year. And it's significant to understand that it had nothing to do with the staff. That was the first time Florida defensive players were actually learning defense concepts since prior to the pandemic. And according to an all kinds of weather editor, Neil Shulman, I've been knowing of Neil Shulman since going back to 2012-ish, maybe, when Will Muschamp was the head coach at Florida. He started a Facebook group for Gator fans and all kinds of weather. He started his articles on the website. He posted his articles. We critique him. He was a friend on Facebook for a little while. And then he started growing and developing his own. People didn't like him at times because he did what he did. He was focused on building his brand, his organization, and now he has this thing going. And he did a 6-month extensive investigation, interviewing multiple players, and I had to sit down and read his article twice, and it was disgusting. He goes into what really went down in Dan Mullen, because Dan Mullen looked like he was the right hire for Florida. And people say, how do you fire a coach that just went to 3 straight New Year Bowl Sixes games, won your division, and almost won the SEC championship? You have one bad season, that's it? No. And this is and right now, this is very important because I need to give the posse credit. The posse is a group of Florida Gator fans that I've been knowing of since this time of Neil Shulman. Back around this time, I started joining 247 with Luke Goldcamp and Thomas Goldcamp and Luke Stampini and all those guys. And that's where the posse, Ghetto Gator and all those guys, Northern Gator. And they used to have the rape van, recruiting and acquisition and personnel, so those are the days. And they've been talking about a lot of things since back then, and they always identify issues years before the issues show up. And the biggest concern about Dan Mullen was he wasn't a recruiter, and he was hiring his buddies, and he wasn't making the right hires. Well, there's also rumors that why is his wife kissing players? Was he watching his players bang his wife as well? That's the kind of foolishness we were wondering, because how in the hell do you have your wife just kissing the lips of multiple players every time they walk by? You're holding them still and kissing them on the lips. Like, what kind of foolishness this is? My wife is not kissing any players, any grown-ass 21-year-old with testosterone levels that he wants to have sex with 6 women at one time. Definitely not happy. I'm not giving him that kind of thought process. So the issue is what went down behind the scenes. That earth is ugly head. Paper pop time. Okay, here's the funny thing. We were looking at, okay, you're recruiting all these guys. They're entering into the transfer portal and they're going to these lesser schools. That means they must not have been good enough. That's the initial thought process when you see players that were ranked in top 247. They play they're sitting on the bench for a couple years and they transfer. They're going to small schools, G5 schools, FCS schools. James Houston, who's now in the NFL balling, but he went to Jackson State. The reality is there was a lack of playing the best players and developing them as young players. Many times we got disgusted. The posse kept yelling it. Hey, we're not playing the best players. We're not recruiting the better players. The personality of the coaches. Are we recruiting at a level that we should be? Seniority over playing the best players? Seriously, is that what we're doing today? You can't keep a healthy locker room if you're not playing the best players at all times. That's a big difference now and last year. You know, Naquan Wright started off as a senior-led running back. He got his chance. But after a few games, we start realizing you're not that guy. We benched you, put the younger guys in, and they overperformed in you. That's what happens sometimes. And that's what happens when you evaluate. That's what happens when you develop. And that's what happens when you allow the best players to play. Sometimes young players play. And when you allow young players to play, that increases your ability to recruit. If you're telling me I'm the best guy and I got to wait 3 years, Tyron Hopper, like it's a crime that he wasn't playing as much as he was playing. Biggest loss we had post Dan Mullen was that linebacker going to Missouri. He has a cousin up there. It's fine. Family members want to play. That's fine. But the culture of Florida was toxic. Beyond comprehension. That's just one thing. You're playing better players. Okay. They went over back to 2018. Like, how did Felipe Franks start over Kyle Trask? And if it wasn't for a tragic dislocated knee or ankle against Kentucky in 2019, do we even win these games with Franks as quarterback? But according to TJ McCoy, who was recruited and transferred from Maryland, I believe, or to Florida under Jim McElwain, it was not close to most of these players who were around in 2008. The interview with Neil Shulman, everyone knew that Kyle Trask was the best quarterback. They loved Felipe. He was a great kid. They loved the guy, but it wasn't close to them. Same thing that reared his ugly head in 2021. Everyone knew Anthony Richardson was the guy. But Dan Mullen purposely said, no, Emory Jones is my guy. Didn't even have a quarterback competition. He selects his quarterbacks before they compete. Whatever reason why he chose Emory Jones, the NFL said differently. Because Emory Jones is still trying to play in college now. And he was class of 2018, while Anthony Richardson is a top 5 draft pick starting in the NFL. And Emory Jones is at his third school since 2021. He's been in Florida, went to Arizona State, now he's at Cincinnati. That shows, what are you doing, Dan? What are you doing? And so this idiot that we hired in 2017 that Tennessee thought they should get, he did great. And the pandemic broke him. There was the same Dan Mullen that we saw that was excited, talking, do you want to fucking thumb wrestle? We'll fight you in the street. Had that competitive spirit, that drive. Trying to remember how it was at Florida, I guess, after watching the Swamp Kings documentary. It seems like they were trying to bring that same culture back to Florida, but that was a broken culture. So it didn't sustain anything. Okay. So after the 2020 season, there's some success, and there's some rumors shooting out that Dan Mullen possibly is interested in the NFL if opportunity presents itself. Just creating news out of thin air, because no idiot in the NFL is thinking about hiring Dan Mullen as the head coach. And that's what we're dealing with going into the offseason of 2021. He negotiates to get a contract extension while half of the rest of the remaining staff of his had expiring contracts at the end of the year. That shows instability in the recruiting world. You know, it's really a shame that we're talking about the lack of ability to recruit in the SEC at the most fertile recruiting grounds at the University of Florida. And it was a personality issue. You cannot sit here and delegate responsibilities as a CEO and not counter check them, cross check. So there's stories of the current recruiting coordinator at Oklahoma working under Dan Mullen. She was disguising herself as Dan Mullen. And as she was disguising herself as Dan Mullen talking to these recruits, Kirby Smart, he found out somehow. And so he's getting these recruits to catch them by surprise. Dan Mullen and the assistants FaceTime me calls out of nowhere. Hey, let's FaceTime, like just random, without notice, because we don't think that's you. This is the kind of foolishness we were dealing with as a program. Players mentally checking out. And then, you know, we Florida fans, led by the posse, understood that John Hevesy was not a coach that we needed. We were concerned about Juwan Cedar when he was retained by through McElwain, that we just moved him over to a tight ends coach, that we didn't keep him as a running backs coach, and we brought back Greg Knox from Mississippi State, who's been a coach for almost 18 years and never been promoted. And you, who's never recruited a top tier running back, and you get rid of Juwan Cedar, who recruited Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce, why was he not playing at Florida? That's another reason. There's reported instances where Dan Mullen sees these younger players balling, and he goes up to assistants like, "You're not going to make a change?" And they say, "Nope." And he just walks off undiscussed. Doesn't make any overtures. He doesn't override any decisions. He doesn't make it demandable that you play the best players in each position group. That's creating a toxic environment. Players want to play. They want to understand that they're being developed to play. Todd Grantham, the defensive coordinator, he has a record of performing very well the first 2 years, and as soon as he gets to year 3 or 4, there's always a extreme drop off. He worked under Nick Saban, Michigan State defensive line. Nick Saban gets promoted and hired by LSU. Somehow, Grantham gets hired into the NFL. He has a stint with multiple teams. He worked at the Colts while Peyton Manning was there as a rookie and young player. Then he goes to the Texans and he plays for the Cowboys as a defensive line coach. And he's hired back by Mark Richt at Georgia, 4 or 5 years there, 2010 and 2013. He's known for doing the little choke it thing when Chaz Henry tries to kick the field goal during the Florida-Georgia game. He was the defensive coordinator in 2012 for Georgia when they were up by 20 in the Georgia Dome against Alabama in the SEC championship. And Alabama comes back running the ball down almost 20 and wins the game. This is the guy, third and Grantham. Georgia fans try to warn us before he was hired. We was like, okay, let's see what he does. And if he doesn't work out, hopefully we get a new defense coordinator. Did not happen. And the problem with Todd Grantham is he got a raise after year 1. He produced a top 25 defense, top 10 defense, great pass rushers. Everything was good. They were hungry, but he didn't recruit very well. He recruited a lot of tweeners. They didn't have a good board on recruiting. And by the time it started getting close to his players, there was a mentality there, an ego, where he felt that he was better than the players, that the players weren't good enough to be in his presence or be taught by him. And he spoke in that demeanor. He made them feel that way. And it doesn't matter what you do as a coach. You could talk shit to a player, but you have to make sure that player knows that you love him in spite of it. Because if you love them right, they'll run through a wall for you. Whatever you tell them to do, they're going to do it. You give them tough love. They appreciate it. But if you're dragging them down in the mud and you make them feel less than a man or less than a human, that's a cultural issue you're creating in the climate. And that's all I read. Countless quotes about Todd Grantham ignoring players. You come out of a meeting, you're trying to get clarification on something. Hey, coach, you're walking down the aisle, the hallway, and he's just walking the hallway looking straight, and he speaks louder. Hey, coach. You say, yeah, I heard you, and keep on walking. Like that kind of story right there. What are you doing as a coach? Dan Mullen, what are you doing? How are you allowing this to happen? According to reports, during the Black Lives Matter, you're investigating to the person of your player if you're a coach during that situation. Saban was at the forefront of this. Kirby was at the forefront of this. Florida coaches weren't interested in interacting with the struggles going on during the pandemic with the players. To me, Dan Mullen began checking out as soon as NIL laws were put in place. I saw the downfall of Dan Mullen in the Texas A&M game 20. Losing that game was unforgivable to me. And I mentioned that on the Paul Feinbaum show. You're a pretender, Dan. And then the LSU game just ripped my head off. Then the bowl game against Oklahoma just ripped my head off. And then 2021 was like, what is going on? And I said, we have to get a new coach. We can't go into 22 with this. Didn't know it was this bad. Mullen just checked out mentally. The Black Lives Matter was the beginning of a real split civil war created in the locker room. These players just wanted love and respect. And these are father figures. When you recruit a football player in college and you bring them to your campus, you take on a parental role. You're going as a mentor. And that's what was so relevant of Swamp Kings. Urban Meyer says that I had one experience kicking off a player, and I took football away from this player, and he ended up overdosing on drugs within a year. That was shaky because you're saying, wait a minute, he made a mistake. Like, what's important here? We're here to love these kids. We're here to be a father figure. And what a lot of people don't realize is football is so mental. We used to hear it as a kid all the time. It's 90% mental. And when your psychological makeup is broken, there's nothing you could do about it as a coach. You break your players, they're not performing for you. And remember the LSU game in 2020 when they just ran all over. Well, no, 2021, wasn't it? 2021, when they played LSU, Anthony Richardson had that wonderful game, and they ran the same counter play for 30 times for 300 yards rushing. They asked Mohamed Diabate, who ended up transferring to Utah in 2022, what went wrong. He said, hey, we're just the shooters. We're told when to shoot. The coaches tell us when and how and what to do. You should talk to them. We just told what we're doing. That was the biggest slight. And that's why Dan Mullen fired Todd Graham and he fired John Hevesy, who was the offensive line coach. There was a joke among the posse for years that John Hevesy was only recruiting players who had hot moms because he was caught having an affair. We didn't know how true that is, but we knew that he had a reputation of telling players they weren't good enough. But you have players reporting they had to brace themselves for Coach Hevesy to say the most messed up things possible to them. They were practicing more restraint against him than learning from him. If you never played the game, you have no clue what the fuck I'm talking about right now. If you only pay attention to fantasy sports, you're like, oh, he's a player. You can just perform. No, it doesn't matter how good you are athletically. If your mind is not right, everything else falls apart. Michael Jordan wasn't the most athletic player out there. He wasn't the smartest player out there. But he was the smartest athletic player you've seen until Kobe Bryant. That's why those guys are GOATs, because they had the mental makeup frame. And you have to cultivate that as a coach. That's what Coach Dean Smith was doing. That's why he's such a great coach all the time, because he created men in those North Carolina basketball locker rooms. And so I bring that is because John Hevesy controls the offensive line. Todd Graham controls the front seven. There's weaknesses on their both sides. There was no camaraderie. There was a lot of competition that was created through false advertisement. You saying that Todd Graham is teasing to kids like, you're doing really good, kid. You're doing really good, man. I think you're going to be playing this week. We're going to put you in there this week. Come on. We're going to put you in. And so you get these players hyped. They call their family and friends. They're like, hey, Coach, so we're doing good. We're going to play this week. You talk your parents and family members to buying tickets and traveling to the game and come see them. And you got into the game for 2 snaps. And the players underneath you that are older play 25 more snaps than you did. And you're sitting there embarrassed. You got to put family to travel all the way from Alabama, Southern Florida, Mississippi, Texas, and you were excited about this. And Todd Graham just creating this animosity because he's not being truthful and honest. He's not creating. See, they try to manufacture competition that had no real substance. It lacked substance. So it was more of like putting 2 dogs in a cage over a bone. That was the kind of competition that Dan Mullen's program was installing. It was eat or be eaten. And that's not a team cohesive environment. So you're talking about players on defensive line, front seven, secondary players, didn't trust the coaches. They didn't trust the coaches. And let's put it like this. Everyone that was interviewed had nothing negative directly to say about Dan Mullen as a person and as a coach. But a lot of them just said he was more focused on coaching the quarterbacks and game planning the offensive game plan than being a CEO. And that's what college football is all about. That's why Nick Saban's the greatest of all time, because he's a CEO. And that's why I keep telling you that Jimbo Fisher is not going to do anything in Texas A&M, because he's not a CEO. Sometimes we hire good coaches at their position to be at a higher position, and they're not qualified for that. Because when you're a CEO, you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to understand every movement. If you're telling me you don't know what your players are getting paid by NIL, either you're lying or you have no sense as a CEO. You hire your buddies. Your next door neighbors to Todd Graham. You've been working with John Hevesy, since going back to the Bowling Green, Utah days under Urban Meyer. There's a comfort level between you and your buddies. And you allowed your program, your team, your players to see that you weren't really the boss. And when you're allowing your wife to kiss players, you're not the boss in your own bedroom. You know, we used to joke, like, is Dan Mullen sitting there eating popcorn, watching his star players bang his wife from behind? That's the kind of stuff you got to really question. And we can only go so far in this. But if we're talking about year 2 in a new program, and I'm going to go more details in this if we start winning the games that I think we're going to win. But talent-wise, according to the college team talent, Florida is only playing 2 teams on their schedule that has as much talent or more. And that's LSU on the road and Georgia in October 28th. So you take those 2 games away. Let's just call those 2 an L, even though it's possible. It's possible under certain realms of reality that those teams can actually lose to Florida this year. But we're just going to give them the edge. Florida State is sitting at a 40% blue chip ratio. They had their best team last year, playing against maybe possibly Florida's worst team in 40 years. They won at home by 7 points. Anthony Richardson couldn't complete a pass in the 4th quarter. 13 straight incomplete passes. Only 3 healthy wide receivers on the roster. The rest were walk-ons. The front 7 was depleted. Javon Dexter was playing 70 snaps a game. You want your defensive tackles playing 35 to 40, because once defensive tackles get tired, there's no pumping any more energy. They're done for the day. They're going to be half-assing it for the rest. So that's why you see championship level programs, they're always cycling in. You see Kirby Smart, he'll send a whole front seven and bring out the other front seven. Then he'll bring in a whole nother front seven after they come back out. That's what you have to do. So if I'm going to rank these from talented to most talented, number 1, Georgia. Number 2, LSU. Number 3, Tennessee. Number 4, Florida State. Number 5, South Carolina. Number 6, Kentucky. Number 7, Arkansas. Number 8, Missouri. Number 9, Utah. Number 10, Vanderbilt. Number 11, Charlotte. Number 12, McNeese State. Now, I hear Utah fans and coaching staff say that's the best talented team they've ever had. Still not good enough to win the Big Ten or SEC. So it doesn't matter what you do in the Pac-12. You play the Florida Gators week 1. And that's an L. I'm going to say 44-10 type of game. The front seven of Florida is a whole different dynamic now. They're going to be a whole different dynamic of aggression. And it's going to be hard for Utah to pick up a first down. And if their quarterback is not healthy, they might have some serious issues in that game. And after you lose, if you win that game, you go into McNeese State at home, you go into them. That's just going to be like, the 10 T-shirts around the girl on the couch is a game bang. Joe Milton comes into the Swamp week 3 in September 16. How hot and humid and muggy that's going to be. I don't see Tennessee winning that game. They haven't won in the Swamp since maybe 2001-ish, around that time. Don't see them going into this is at home. I give Tennessee the edge, but they're not going to the Swamp September after that much momentum and a break to allow their depth to develop. And so they open up 3-0, 1-0 in the SEC, and they have another home game in September against Charlotte, another food quality. They're going to eat their food, and they're just tipping around, building up their depth, getting those freshman wide receivers more and more reps, because they only had to perform in 2 games so far. And so now the depth is really being established. Arlis Borderham at tight end. You're going to see a lot of players develop now because they're getting ready for their first SEC road game the following week, and that's at Kentucky. Run the ball, make the simple plays, and pressure Kentucky. And they should come out of there with a win. It's not that hard. You're more talented. Don't be Dan Mullen and lose the food. That's all it is. Last year has no relevance on this year. These are snipers now. We got a lot of talent on this team, and no one will know. By the time Utah is stomped at halftime, it'll be too late to make these bets. They come back home. They got Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt and Florida State played a Florida team that was lacking 5 to 7 wide receivers. If Xavier Henderson's playing against Vanderbilt, there's no fumble right before halftime recovering a punt and allowing Vanderbilt to score in the end zone to create a separation in the game. None of that stuff happens. Special teams murdered us because of Xavier Henderson. We're going to improve in that aspect. So beating Vanderbilt is the standard. And you go into South Carolina. The reason why South Carolina lost that game last year is because South Carolina cannot stop the run, nor can they run the ball. And that doesn't change in 2023. Florida dominated the line of scrimmage. That's why they won 38-6. When you dominate the line of scrimmage, none of these teams really dominated Florida last year. It was more Florida beating themselves and allowing these teams to continue to win. Georgia's the only team that really dominated Florida last year, or beat Florida, where Florida had to play their best game to even be competitive. All these teams, they play Florida at their best, they lose. South Carolina played Florida at their best before all the injuries packed up and got stomped, as Texas A&M did. So now you enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7-0, which should be the standard, because Georgia-Florida should always be a top 10, top 5 matchup. And you have your break going to that bye, and you're going into Georgia. And this is basically a home game, road game, no matter how you look at it, neutral site game. And this is a game where you're going to need everything possible to happen. You're going to need some injuries on their side. You're going to need a lot of things to work in your favor for you to win this game. But it's not happening right now. If you do end up finishing 7-0, as I predict, I'm going to tell all kind of lies to myself and out to the world to make you believe that Georgia's going to lose this game. But right now, it's not happening. Then the stretch in November begins. And this is where it gets interesting, because if you predicted them Florida to go 5-7, 4-8, they've already won 3 games or 4 games you thought they were going to win. And so Arkansas coming into November, this game is going to have a lot of hype for the recruits, because the first and only time of the season and the first time ever we're wearing black uniforms in that game. It's going to be something, a tradition established by Napier. Excuse the interruption. Well, power outages happen. So we were looking at the schedule. We're looking down the road, and we were breaking into November. Arkansas game, a win. That's Arkansas can win this game, but do they have the health? Do they have the depth? And do they have the running game, really? Rocket Sanders is a great running back, but do they have the running game? Sometimes you have a great running back, but not a strong running presence. Is he in between the tackles? Is he going to get those tough yards? Not sure. It's going to have a lot of momentum in this game. And after Georgia, you're going to be pissed off that you lost that game. You want to still stay relevant. So this is a must-win game for Florida. I think they win this game, pull it out. I say that's more like maybe a 10-point win. Following week, they go on the road to LSU. I'm going to give them a loss here. Giving LSU the edge as 11-1 favorite. It's possible Florida could pull this out, but we have to see how they perform against Arkansas first. But the only advantage I give Florida in this situation is that they're ideally playing LSU in November for the second time in 40 years, and the first time off a fresh game against Alabama, which is always, as I've been repeating, the best time to play LSU. It's right after they play Alabama. Now, whether or not Missouri is a good team at the point the following week, that's debatable. I don't think they are a good team. I don't know if they will have their coach at the time. As you notice, I've predicted them to finish last in the SEC East. So I got this as an easy win, no matter if it's in October, September, or November, but it's at night possibly or during the day. It doesn't matter. It's just a cold game. Doesn't mean you're going to lose because you play in the cold. Missouri's not that good. They have some good defensive players. Their quarterback is okay. They had some defensive wide. They had some good wide receivers. One is at Georgia now, so we don't know. But I expect food to be food, and Missouri has always been food for the most part. Then we get to the close of the season at home, close out the season against Florida State, who embarrassed you the previous season on the road, underperformed in that game. You were facing possibly going 8-4, but you finished 6-6 instead. They stormed the field on a 6-6 team, and that showed how important that game was to them as a program. Only way you can show how important it is to you is by dominating. And I'm not expecting Florida State to be a good team this year. I think they peaked last year. I think they take a step back. There's a difference between sneaking up on everyone and being hunted. And when you're being hunted, it's a whole different game. So I think LSU, Clemson, Miami, and Florida are hunting for Florida State. And if they can find a way to beat Wake Forest, North Carolina State, Miami, and Clemson prior, I'll give Florida State the edge in this game. But I expect them to lose almost all those games because they haven't done it. And I expect LSU, even with the report of Mason Smith out due to a suspension of improper benefits in 2021, I feel like this suspension could have been served last year. But nonetheless, it's going to be served this Sunday. And that gives Florida State a little edge. But we're not giving Florida State the edge against the Gators in this one. They won. Norvell can do it again. I'm not believing Norvell can do it again. So 10-2 with toss-ups against Tennessee and Kentucky. So it can range from. So now you see that Florida, Kentucky, and Tennessee are all in the same range as whether who beats who. But we're looking at the dynamics of the schedule. It sets up really well for Florida because no one knows what this team looks like except everyone looking at the past. And looking at the past and looking at the current rankings, preseason rankings, that's a total road to destruction. So we covered this. We have a lot more to say. We're just going to limit it to that. We've gone way over the board on this topic. I feel like it's a passionate topic to cover about college football. And we'll put the link into the website on YouTube to Neil Shulman's and all kinds of weather articles. He dropped 2-part article over the weekend in the last few days. And that's why I changed it. Florida was not number 2 when I first started this. And it looked like they climbed up through a lot of reasons. And I think this defense is going to be very good. I'm looking at these offenses. I'm like, whew. This defense is much better. Cam Jackson, to me, is the best player on the team. And when when the best player on your team is a defensive tackle, I like that. I'm all about the line of scrimmage, baby. I don't care who your quarterback is. You're talking about Graham Mertz is trash. Let me tell you something. We don't need Joe Burrow to win 10 games. We need Joe Burrow to beat Georgia and LSU. We just need a running game and a defense to beat teams less talented than us. 10-2 is a bad year for Florida. 9-3 is a really bad year for Florida. That's the standard we need to get back to. And this is the way you build momentum with DJ Lagway in this class that could possibly – you perform like this, Florida's flipping Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State. You perform at this level, you're not only flipping Jeremiah Smith, you're taking LJ McCray, Xavier Mincy, you're landing Jordan Seaton, and that's a possible number 2 class in recruiting. You win 9 to 10 games with a top 3 class, you're going to that 2024 playoff mode with a lot of momentum because you know you only have to finish in the top 12 to get in the playoffs. And we'll see how the automatic bids go because SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey is like, hey, you got an expiring conference. We need to renegotiate the terms of this expansion of playoffs. And it's only on the short term, this expansion of playoffs, so we'll see how long it lasts. But yeah, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Missouri. Only way I can see you losing those games, Florida Gators is if you have injuries, if you're not healthy, you have some freak injuries to the offensive line, defensive front seven, tight end room, Graham Mertz goes down. Those are the kind of things you need for Florida to go under 8 wins. And I just don't see it. I think they're a much better team. And if the playbook is 1,000 pages in 2022, Anthony Richardson, from all reports, is only working with 15 pages. And Graham Mertz is dealing with 750 pages. So the offense is going to be much more expanded right now. There's going to be a lot of concept routes, open space. They have 3 new wide receivers and this is why I'm really, let me close this. They're Hall of Fame quarterback, Florida Hall of Fame quarterback, Shane Matthews, who was Steve Spurrier's first quarterback, won the first SEC championship under. He's a hard critic. He's old school. 13 years in the NFL. He's harsh. And I kind of look to him now because he gets a chance to see these players more than anybody in the media, anybody from Gators Online, anybody from 247. He actually sees the players in practice. Those guys, they only see 15 minutes of warm up. So he said this last year about our team. He said, listen, Anthony Richardson is an athlete playing quarterback. It's not very accurate. Doesn't have touch. He doesn't make basic throws. We're going to struggle. We don't have the athletes at wide receiver. They're not catching the ball well. The front seven of defense is lacking a lot of depth. This is a 6-7 win team. This is what Shane Matthews said last year. I was riding 84-9-3, like, no way we lose that. No way. Then Shane Matthews just humbles me. And so this year he says, Graham Mertz doesn't remind me of those quarterbacks that could jump super high, that could throw the ball 80 yards. He said he just reminds me of those Steve Spurrier quarterbacks. That is music to our ears. What does a Steve Spurrier quarterback do, Ron? They're not cute. They're not fancy. They just if you're not watching them, what that is, that's just a flick of the motion of reading the defense and putting ball placement where it needs to go and allowing the wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends to hit their points and deliver it. His IQ is high. He understands defensive concepts. He's been in that room all day and night. To think that he's the worst quarterback in the SEC when he's coming from the Big Ten, which is the second highest level of college football play, and really, they might not have the athletes in the Big Ten, but the head coaching, the coaching in Big Ten is astronomical. It's NFL level caliber. So when you're used to dealing, you didn't have the athletes, you didn't have the system, you didn't have the playbook, you didn't have the culture to thrive in Wisconsin, but you thrived there as a man. You're coming down to Florida for business, and that's why he's been locked in. So to say Graham Mertz is bottom tier quarterback in the conference is just hoping that Florida is bad, not dealing with reality. So Shane Matthews says the front sevens was going to separate this team, but he sees 8 wins minimum. If he sees 8 wins minimum and he's saying that it just depends on the front seven, I'm going with 10-2. That was a confidence builder. And then this article drops, and I'm like, wait a minute, you're telling me that our defensive players hadn't studied concepts and defense or haven't really worked on the playbook or development in almost 2 years, and we still won 6 games? Sign me up for more. Sign me up for more of this Billy Napier, because I feel like that defensive staff is an all-star staff, okay? Like Nick Saban was a defensive coach, so his offensive staff was always an all-star team. Billy's an offensive guy. He's got his guys around him. He hires the all-stars on defense. Mike Peterson played in college, played in the league, coached in this league. He was under Muschamp. Great defensive edge coach for South Carolina those many years. A lot of those South Carolina 5-stars were landed by Coach Mike Pete. Defensive coordinator, defensive line coach, Sean Spencer. Chaos, Coach Chaos. That's what we're all about this year, is chaos. inside linebacker, former defense coordinator for North Carolina, Jay Bateman, top recruiter in 2024 class, landed, was it 3 or 4 top 10 linebackers in the country in this class? He's got those linebackers playing. They're more informed. Then you have Corey Raymond coaching the entire secondary. The entire secondary. That's improvement. It's his players. We have a new defense that's just kind of going along with the program, understands the system already. Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina. You've been warned. That's Ron from Oakland, live from these streets. Thank you so much. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We got more content coming to you. Thank you so much and have a great day.